And now I want to move on to the huge controversy of machine matzahs. And this goes back almost 200 years. It was one of those controversies that really brought out very harsh language and very extreme sentiments. It also caused alliances and friendships to break apart. So 190 years ago, the first machines were introduced to Jewish communities. Reb Shlomo Kluger stood at the head of the camp that was very strongly against machine matzahs. And all the Hasidic Gedolim belonged to that camp. Reb Shlomo Kluger printed a kuntris named Matzoh LeBeis Yisrael. And in that kuntris we find the Tshuvas of Reb Shlomo Kluger, the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz, the Chidushei Harim, Reb Avrom Alechechenover, who were three great Hasidic teachers in Poland and in Galicia. The Divrei Chaim, Chidushei Harim, and Reb Avrom Alechechenover. There are many other Hasidic Rabbeim, but they weren't Poskim. These three were recognized as Gedolei Yisrael, and Reb Mordechai Zev Ettinger, who was the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson. Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson was Matir, and he was the most substantial figure, Bein HaMatirim, because the only girl of that generation that could compare to Reb Shlomo Kluger was Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson, the Shoel HaMeshiv. So Reb Shlomo Kluger's kintrus was called Matzoh LeBeis Yisrael. Rabbi Yosef Shaul's kintrus was called Bitul Matzoh. And he tore apart Reb Shlomo Kluger's arguments. And together with Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson were two other great Gedolim, the Ksav Sofer, the son of the Chasam Sofer, and the Aruch LaNer. So the Ksav Sofer was in Hungary, the Aruch LaNer was in Germany, Altona. But all the Polish Gedolim and most of the Galiciana Gedolim were against Mashiach Matzahs. Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson was the only one that was for. So Rabbi Yosef Shaul and his brother-in-law, Reb Mordechai Zev, wrote many Sforim together. And that was an unbelievable phenomenon. They wrote about 10 Sforim together. Most notable was the Mogen Geborim. Mogen Geborim is an amazing sefer, quoted extensively by the Mishnah Brura. But what makes it far more amazing, when the Mogen Geborim came out, the Mordechai Zev Ettinger was 23, and Rabbi Yosef Shaul Natanson was 19 years old. 19 years old. And he wrote one of the Sifrei Yesod and Shulchan Aruch Chaim, and the Mishnah Brura quotes him all the time. It's just unbelievable, their godless. So on the screen, we see those contrasim. I actually have a copy, but today, everything is available. I actually, for many years, was happy that it wasn't reprinted, because we have some very, very harsh language, especially the Yosef Shaul Natanson. He is offended by the Machmirim. And he writes about his brother-in-law. Everything he knows from me. And all the covet he ever had, he had from me. So how does he dare to come out against me? And he has some very harsh words for the Divrei Chaim and the Chidushei Harim as well. Okay. Kachi darka shel Torah, oy reise ku meratche bei. We have many, other examples, like the Ra'o and the Rashba, in Teres Abayis, in Bedek Abayis. The Ravid and the Rambam. The Ravid sometimes uses very harsh language. So let me tell you a nice story about the Kloisim Megarev. So the Kloisim Megarev built Kiyatzans in Netanya. It is where I lived for many years. It is where my family moved from America 3 days before my Bar Mitzvah. I think I told you about my personal history in the past. So Kiryat Sanz Netanya is where the Kloisim Rebbe lived, and almost everybody in Kiryat Sanz Netanya was a Kloisim Chassid, a Sanz Chassid. But the Kloisim Rebbe also built Kiryat Sanz in Yerushalayim, and that was more of a business venture. There weren't that many Kloisim Chassidim in Yerushalayim, and if there were Chassidim, they preferred to come to live next to the Rebbe in Netanya. So after many buildings were built and apartments were sold, the Kloisim Rebbe was appalled to learn that in Kiryat Sanz Yerushalayim there are many minyanim before Shlit Sabbeinu Tam Motzei Shabbos. And he said, this is totally impossible. I cannot agree to this. In my Kiryat, that is called Kiryat Sanz, and the name of the Divrei Chaim, they don't keep Rabbeinu Tam, this cannot be. And he was even more hurt when he learned that many people in Kiryat Sanz Yerushalayim eat machine matzahs. Because the Prushim in Yerushalayim, most of them ate machine matzahs. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach ate machine matzahs. Chassidim didn't. So I remember the Kloisim Rebbe, Moiri V'Rabbi, the Divrei Yatzav said, I must meet Roshei HaKol. So they were all invited to a very urgent meeting with the Rebbe, with the Tzanza, with the Kloisim Rebbe. He turned to the people and he said, you know, I don't like to dictate to you what you do, what you don't do. You're big people, you're grown-ups, you decide alone. But I built a kiryah, I built a shchona. All I'm asking from you is to keep Shabbos and don't eat chometz for Pesach. Is that too much to ask? Both are koros. So he said, all I'm asking, keep Shabbos and don't eat chometz on Pesach. To the Kloisim Rebbe, if you did a malacha before Rabbeinu Tam, you were a mechal on Shabbos. And if chaz v'sholem you ate machine matzahs, then you ate chometz b'Pesach. So the Divrei Chaim in his tshuva writes, machine matzahs are chometz gomer. That is very harsh language. So this was one of the greatest controversies and machlokes in the past 200 or 300 years of the basis for machine matzahs. So some of the Gedolim were for, most of them were against, and Hasidim were all against. Hungarians and Yeki, not the Hasidic ones, but the others, supported machine matzahs. And this drove a wedge between the two brothers-in-law. Both were Gedolei Yisrael, Reb Matzoh Zavetingen and Reb Yosef Shor Natanson. It drove them apart, and they never were the same as before this controversy. What halachic issues were at stake? It wasn't all about halacha. Probably many of the Gedolim that came out against Shimatzis were afraid of the developments. You know, with machines, every few years there are going to be different machines, and machines change and evolve. I think they were afraid of breaching the Messiahs. And this machlokes wasn't over in that generation. It continued in the next generation. Chuvas Maharsham, Chelik Beisim et Zayin. He supports machine matzahs, following in the footsteps of the great Shoel Meshiv. The Avnei Nezer, Tov Kuf Lamed Vav, Tov Kuf Lamed Zayin, is very much, on the screen we have Tshuva number 2, and that's Chelik Dalet Kuf Chof Tes. I quoted Tshuva number 1, which is Chelik Beis Tet Zayin. The Avnei Nezer, naturally, following in the footsteps of the Shiurim. He was one generation younger than the Shiurim, but Polish Rabbeim. The Avnei Nezer comes out harshly against machine matzahs. And if we talk about harsh language, so the Avnei Nezer refers to the Marsham. He doesn't mention his name, but it's quite clear whom he means. So the Avnei Nezer writes, I heard that one of the Gedolim supports machine matzahs, but the Shiurim was against. Ma Yane Zvuv Katzutz Kanafayim Neged Hanesher Bashamayim. Nice rhyme, rhymes, but I think it's too harsh language. The Masham was anything but a Zvuv Katzutz Kanafayim. So the Shiurim was a Nesher Bashamayim. He was an eagle up in the skies, but so was the Masham. So anyway, What are halachic issues? Primarily lishma. And this brings us back to a discussion regarding lishma. So the Divrei Chaim in his tshuva writes, I don't want to get into halacha. Kibalti memori chomi. The shver of the Divrei Chaim was the Baruch Tam, or Baruch Frankel. So the Divrei Chaim says, I learned a klal from my shver, a klal in Rabbonos. Sometimes you need to answer without giving any halachic rationale. Just say, this is also. So the Divrei Chaim refuses to get into a discussion. And he says, Mishim Matzos is chometz gomer. Why? I don't need to tell you why. It's chometz gomer. So sometimes we don't want to get into pilpul, because then, we leave room for argument. And I felt that way years ago when we discussed the kosher switch. But I feel that in our generation, that is no longer a derech. You can't just say also. This is the info age. You need to explain why it's also, and I did at the time regarding the kosher switch, but that's not our sugya today. So Reb Shlomo Kruger argues, Mishim Matzos can't be lishma, because it's not maseh odom. When you need lishma, needs to be maseh odom. Machines are not maseh odom. And many other gedolim, including Rabbi Yosef Schultz, says, first of all, it is maseh odom. Might be a grama, might be magnifying human power, human strength, but it's still lishma, especially by matzah, because by matzah we don't need a siyah lishma. All we need is shemu lishma. So the Shoel HaMeishav argued, even with Mishim Matzos, it is l'shem matzos mitzvah. Very interesting comment. We find two tshuvas in Marsham. Chelik Beis Siman Tet Zayin. He's machshir Mishim Matzos, and he says it's kosher, it's okay. Chelik Dalet Kuf Chavtes, he says it's not okay, it's not lishma. What happened between Chelik Beis and Chelik Dalet? Did he retract? No, he did not. Very simple difference. The first machines that came to Hungary and Germany and Galicia did not use electricity. That was before they even discovered and made use of electricity. Those were mechanical machines based on galgalashianayim. What's galgalashianayim in English? Wheels. There are many methods to magnify human power, because man is one of the weakest animals. The gift HaKadosh Baruch Hu bestowed upon man is his mind. Humans' muscles are not the greatest there are. A chimpanzee is half the size of a human being, and he's 10 times as powerful. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to man is not his muscles, it's not his great power, but his mind. And man found many ways to magnify and to multiply his power. So the first machines that were brought and produced in Europe used gears, galgalashianayim, to multiply and magnify human force. There's another method, which is hydraulics. Electricity is the most effective, but it's not the only one. So the first machines were mechanical machines using gears. So the Marsha maintained that is lishma, that is koyach gaver, that's koyach ha'odom. Chelik Dalet Kuf Chavtes is dealing with electricity. Electricity is not koyach ha'odom. You just put on the switch. Unlike using gears in which you turn a wheel, and that wheel turns another and another, and bigger, and that is how you magnify your force. So the Marsha maintains electricity is not koyach gavra, and that is why it would not be defined as lishma. However, mechanical machines are. What is a gewaltige Yiddish? The first machine to produce matzos is found more than 700 years ago in Meiri in Moganavos. In Moganavos and Meiri, describes what seems very similar to the first machines to produce matzahs. And the Meiri has nothing against it. Wow, if the Gedolim would have seen that Meiri in Molanovis, it might have been a game changer. So part of the machlokes was the lishma. According to Reb Shlomo Kluger, lishma is only masa odam in the most direct fashion. Other Gedolim said no, machines are still lishma. Divrei Malkiel was a contemporary of the Marsham. Shuvas Divrei Malkiel, Chelik Dalet Semachov, he is machsher even electrical machines, based on the argument. All we need by matzah is shimu lishma, not asiya lishma. The Divrei Malkiel was a Malkiel Terabon, one of the great Litvish poskim, was the Rav and Lamsha. So the Marsham agrees to a mechanical machine, but he rejects the electrical machine. The Divrei Malkiel is machsher even machine matzahs using electricity because it is all about shemur and not about asiya. So this argument goes on till this very day, but we no longer argue and we no longer attack. It is what it is. Hasidim don't use mishim matzahs. Ashkenazim do. Most of the Litvish Sholem uses mishim matzahs. Many are makbid matzahs mitzvah b'leila seder to have matzahs. To be machmir, that might be kusher matzahs, that there might be a problem of lishma. And lishma is not necessary only b'leila seder. So the argument about mishim matzahs once again touches upon the difference between all the other sugyas of lishma, which are asiya lishma and ksiva lishma, and matzah, in which we merely need shimu lishma. And that is why many gedolim were machsher, even mishim matzahs, in which electricity is used, and not only different methods to magnify koyach ha'odam. So the Divrei Chaim also deals with tzitzis that were made by machines and by automated factories. And the Divrei Chaim comes out against the tzitzis as well. And he says, tzitzis, if you make it by machine, it's not lishma. What is interesting, today, all the batim, we use machines to produce batim. It is virtually impossible to make batim without magnifying koyach ha'odam. So that's the tshuva of the Divrei Chaim, quoting Ramot Chasev Melevov and Reb Shlomo Kluger. And does he quote his shiver that, yeah, לדעתי הרבה טעמים על פי דין לאסור, אך הם כמו סביתי, כאשר קיבלתי מפי מחיתוני הגאון מלייפניק, that's the בורך טעם, שבכמויס אלה הדבורים אין לגלויס הטעם, רק לפסוק הדין בהחלט, והשומע ישמע. ולכן בדרך החלט אני אומר לכם, כי אוי זה מצס על כלי זה, חומץ גומר. So that is what the Kloisen Magadebe told the elders of Kiryat Tzad Yerushalayim. All I'm asking from you is not to eat chometz and to keep Shabbos. So today, many are machmir, even by the machine matzahs, that, you know, to have koyach gavra at the first stage, early stage, or some stages. So the comment I just made is making batim. We use machines. We don't use electricity, but we do use gears and mechanical machines to produce batim. Ve'ein poitze pe u'mitzavtzef. So obviously, nizraku mepi hachavura v'chein ame debar. As long as you use mechanical methods to magnify koyach ha'odam, it is considered lishma. All the batim of the tefillin and the tzitzis are produced by mechanical machines, even the firmest ones. So obviously, that is considered lishma. So Hasidim don't eat mishimatzis. It is either because electricity is different, or just minag avoseinu biyadenu. Especially when the Divrei Chaim doesn't really share with us his reasoning, his svoras, his rationale. He says, I keep this to myself, but I totally reject mishimatzis. Nahara v'pashtei. And I think, yes, I'm a Talmud of the Kloizer Magerebi, but I think in sugyas that go back 200 years, we just should say, minag avoseinu biyadenu. And everybody adheres to the minhagim of minag avoisov, minag raboisov, elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, and nahara upashtei. So I find this a very fascinating sugya. Anybody that wants to delve deeper into this sugya, as I mentioned, there's a big arichas of Minchas Osha Psochim, and once again, a Minchas Osha Moyadim, Chelik Gimel.